All right, so I want to talk about animation right now, and the three primary types of animation that you'll run into, and terminology you might need to know in order to move down this path of animating. The first we'll talk about is keyframe animation. So I'm going to take this cube, and all I want to do is move it from over here to over here over time. Right now, I have a timeline that is set up to 90 frames. And it's at generally animation in 3D runs at 30 frames a second. At least it does by default in Cinema, which is, my primary bag. So I tend to run everything at 30 frames a second. Whatever works for you works for you. Cool. So how do we get this from here to here? We move the timeline. It doesn't move. What we need to do is set up keyframes. And if you're familiar with any type of compositing software like After Effects, or even something quite a bit simpler like Premiere and making masks over time, they will use keyframes. Same thing. It's just specific sets of data at different frames. So if I want it to be over here at frame 0, I need to tell it to capture that information. For this, it's fairly easy. There's a little keyframe button right here. So we just click there and it sets a keyframe. You can see a keyframe right there. That's now down on our timeline. It wasn't there before. And you can see come up to the manager, click the cube, and you can see down here, the cube has now these red dots next to each one of these attributes. And this is the X, Y, and Z position, which we talked about before. This is its rotation, which we have not changed at all, but if we did, you can see it changes here and back over here if we have it there. Now, it's yellow. Why would it be yellow? That's because this keyframe has changed, but it has not been recorded because we're still at frame 0. If we moved one frame forward, it would all pop back to where we've recorded it to. If we scroll to the end of our timeline, 90 frames in, and we move this from left to right, and we hit that keyframe button again, you'll see this line's been created from left to right. And as we move the timeline left to right, our cube moves from left to right. Really, really exciting stuff. All right, so now we're going to talk about simulations. So a simulation is where the piece of software has inside of it a physics engine. It has a basic understanding of gravity, of wind, of rotation, of weight, all these things that are very, there's my dog again, that are would be very complicated to animate by hand. Going in and putting keyframes in when something, blows, when a piece of fabric blows in the wind. It's tough. It's really tough to do. And there was a time that people had to do that by hand, and they usually just didn't do it. Some early game cinematics would have that. Early animated films would have that. But for this, we have access to it very, very easily. So I'm just going to rotate this cube around a little bit. What's really useful is that Cinema4D recently updated all of its physics engines, and so they just operate so smooth and clean now. But this is going to be a very simple simulation. So I right-clicked on the cube, brought up this drop-down, and inside this drop-down, I'm going to simulation tags. In Cinema, a tag is a piece of information that you literally tag to the object. So I'm telling Cinema that I want this cube to behave by what they call a rigid body, which is a solid object that has physics attached to it or operates with physical rules. So we hit that rigid body, and now if we hit play, it'll take a second to figure itself out, and then it will drop. It's dropping because of gravity, but it's going right through this guy. Why is it going right through this guy when we would want it to hit? Because we haven't told Cinema that it needs to have the same sets of properties to it. we're not going to give it a rigid body because we don't want it to fall. We don't want physics to hit it. What we will give it is a collider so that it becomes an object that the cube interacts with. We hit play, and now it hits and falls. I know, again, super, super exciting. But you notice, no keyframes. Everything that's being decided by this interaction isn't really decided by us. The initial setup is, but what occurs is simulated. So it moves around based on the physics that have been set up. And we can change some of those in the attribute manager down here. I'm not going to do that right now, except for maybe, I don't know, let's make it bouncy. Why not? See what happens. Bump, bump, bump. Bounced a whole bunch more than it did before. Let's make it really bouncy. Nothing really acts like that, but cool anyway. And these are incredibly simple simulations. You can get quite a bit more complex with them. Even something as simple as adding. Let's see if there's a Voronoi. So I've got this in the default setup. I usually have like a really custom setup, so I don't always remember where everything is. There we go. And we've moved, this is a Voronoi fracture. Basically, it just, and I probably just butchered the pronunciation of that, but I've only ever set it to myself, so it doesn't matter. It just creates all these segments within the cube. And now that we've added the physics tab to the fracture, those segments should operate independently. So we hit play, boom. Oh yeah, they're still really, really bouncy. That's not what we want. We would like it. We would like 0 bounce and a lot of friction. Let's give it maybe just 2. That's a lot. All right. There we go. That is almost pretty. Cool. That is a simulation. And you can get a lot more complex, like way, way, way more complex. I don't know, maybe I'll cut to some simulations that I've done. Like, hold on. There. All right, so now we have our third animation type that we're going to talk about for this video. It is motion capture, which, you know, you can tell what it is just by looking at it, but I'm sure you're fairly familiar. Motion capture is people who have been strapped up in suits or now filmed and run through an AI system to capture their movement, motion capture, and get those nice, like, high fidelity movements that are very natural and very human. The like shake of her legs and the snap of her wrist and the way her head tilts. Those are all human things that look like what we're used to seeing and convey meaning and emotion to us that are, you know, not impossible. There are incredibly talented people who do it, but are very, very difficult to get correct in hand animation. It's just really hard to do with keyframes. And not all of us are, you know, artisans when it comes to doing keyframe work. Some of us just want to tell stories or want to make pretty animations and that sort of thing, and we're not like spending our time tweaking every individual move and pose. So this is from Mixamo. Mixamo is a free site that I believe Adobe owns, and they offer these animations for free. There's a whole bunch of them there. And they've been there for years. They're kind of like, I wouldn't call them a gold standard, but they're definitely like a standard of where you can get motion capture data to work with. The thing you need to know about motion capture is how it moves objects. So I'm going to give kind of a very simple explanation of this. You have here what's called a skeleton, because, hey, look, it's the skeleton. And it has a series of bones that are these lines from here to here, and a series of joints that are these circles where the bones begin and touch the next one. The joints move, the bones tend to stay completely straight. So from here to here will move, from here to here will move, if that makes sense to you guys. And the joints will rotate in 360 degrees, actually more than 360, 360 times 360. It'll move in any direction they need to, rotating the bones with them. And with that, you end up being able to collect all of the data of a human's movement and attach it to this skeleton. And then the skeleton attaches to the surface of the object and creates deformation, so it creates movement. That is done with a process called weighting. It is, here it's a little weight object. It is complicated, but not impossible to understand. In Cinema, this is how they represent weighting. And you can see each bone has a color attached to it. This actually isn't just yellow, it's shades of yellow. This isn't just blue, it's shades of blue, but it's the arm. And each one of these bones exerts that amount of deformation to the mesh so that the mesh moves with it and creates natural looking changes to the mesh itself. There are people who spend their whole times like creating weights. They spend their whole life just painting in weight. I don't spend a lot of time on it myself because it's one of those things where, like, if the car runs, I drive it. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to drive. And so in this case, I'd be here to animate. So I'm not really worried about how this is constructed in my day-to-day. There are times I have to go in and do it. There's times when I have new characters that I've created where I have to go in and do it. We're not going to get into that. It's a long process. But for entry work, you can absolutely grab one of the models that's on Mixamo, download the data that goes with it, and have an animation. A pretty nice animation, actually. Cool. All right, those are our three.